Hello and welcome. This is John Neary from ExpenseWatch.com. My role at ExpenseWatch is VP of Sales and Customer Satisfaction. Joining me today as a special guest is one of our longtime customers and the current VP of Finance at the YMCA of South Florida. His name is John Pulio. And in probably about 15 minutes or so, we'll be hearing a little bit more from John, but I wanted to make sure all attendees were aware that John was on the phone. The content we prepared for this afternoon basically is kind of fivefold. First and foremost, we've had the ability to get our hands on some recent research provided by Ardent Partners, focusing on some of the spending pressures that nonprofit organizations are facing today. So we wanted to take that information and share that with the group today and share some of the findings that Ardent had through that research piece. Beyond that, because we are focusing on the processes associated with spending, in most cases it's a debate between manual process versus an automated one. And what we're trying to bring to light today is the cost associated with each and how meaningful that should be to the organizations that are trying to do a better job today managing their spend. From that, we'll talk about some of the top strategies that Ardent is suggesting organizations adopt to move forward and to better their situations around managing spend. And from there, we'll reintroduce John Pulio, and given John's experience in managing spend over at the YMCA of South Florida and some of the things he did to accomplish doing that more efficiently, we'll go through a Q&A session with John, and I think that will be highly advantageous for the group on the line to hear and speak to somebody who's actually gone through some of the same challenges you may be facing today, and talk about the ways in which John and the group at the YMCA really chose to better the process down there. Lastly, we'll spend some time just introducing ExpenseWatch, our capabilities, and give you a quick tour of our technology, looking at both the mobile app and the online application. To dive into it, so a bit more background on myself. I've been in software and consulting for 20-plus years. I've sold a number of different products to a number of different types of organizations, both large, small, nonprofit, etc. For the past 10 years, I've been working extensively here at ExpenseWatch, and our focus has been primarily working with what we kind of categorize as small to mid-sized businesses and helping them better manage their expense process. From those experiences, obviously, I've spoken to thousands of organizations across the country, all having different charters, different verticals, different focuses. But when we speak with those organizations, the one challenge that resonates across all those organizations that's kind of consistent, independent of who you are or how big you are, is the fact that they're all struggling with how to best manage their spending or best manage the spend. If you look at some of the research that Ardent conducted most recently, they found out that organizations across the board are only managing less than half, about 49% of their spend. And when you break that spend down into various components, and the primary components or types of spend that we typically see out there involve spend associated with bills or invoices that are coming in the door. That's your AP aspect of spend, your expense reporting, and last but not least, your form of procurement. That would be your invoices that are associated with a PO that's been already created and sent to a vendor for an order. But when you look across all aspects of spend, you're finding that less than 30% of the organizations are doing anything around AP automation, and only about 36% of the organizations are doing anything relative to automating expense management. This becomes critical because when you look at these organizations and as you grow, you're having more and more people that are accountable for ultimately spending on behalf of the organization. Given the various conduits that they spend through, it becomes really impactful in terms of how the organization is, number one, managing this process, because inherently there's cost embedded in the process. And then secondarily, are you getting the data and the information that's necessary for you from the process to make the best decisions about how you spend moving forward and about the relationships with the vendors that you have moving forward? Okay, so there's kind of a two-pronged approach here. If you want to have a sound process, because the process in and of itself is driving costs within your organization, and then you want to be able to leverage the information that you can glean from the process to make better decisions about how you run the business moving forward. So when we talk about the costs associated with a manual process, we're going to first focus on talking about the expense reporting process. And we start there because there's a lot of information out there relative to comparing cost of manual processes versus those that are automated. The information you're looking at on the screen before you was presented or provided through PayStream Advisors, another advisory firm that focuses primarily on the SMB marketplace, and this was done from this year. And if you look at the data, there's different tiers of automation that they're suggesting exist out there in the marketplace. You know, from being completely manual, and again, I know there's a lot of people in their shoes today when it comes to expense reports where you're leveraging, you know, primarily probably an Excel template to get information captured from the field and have that facilitate through an approval process, ultimately making its way to accounting where that information needs to be assessed, validated, and then ultimately processed for reimbursement or payment. But in a highly manual environment, those transactions are costing you, you know, close to $27 per transaction. As you start to adopt automation, that obviously drops down to about $17 and change, and a fully automated approach towards expense reporting is costing the organization approximately about $6.85 per transaction. So you can see there's dramatic differences between, you know, how you're supporting and adhering to that process, whether it's a manual one or a fully automated one, and there's definitely you know, cost advantages towards the automated approach. So just to quantify this and make it more tangible, for the organizations that we support and focus on average, those employees are submitting about 1.5 expense reports per month. So if you're looking at an organization that's producing about 100 expense reports during the course of a month, the savings can range anywhere from $800 to $2,000 per month, or $10,000 to $24,000 per year. Okay, that's not taking into account leveraging the information that you can now glean from having an automated process in place. This is simply suggesting that, look, we can drive efficiencies in the organization. We can reduce overhead and time associated with supporting this process to the tune of potentially $10,000 to $24,000 a year, which is substantial. Moving beyond that and looking at other inherent spend processes, it becomes more complex. When you talk about purchase orders or the procurement process, there's not as much data out there that exists around expense reporting, but there's certainly information that is helpful and guiding to us. When it comes to the purchasing process or procurement process, this is another animal in and of itself. There's different models out there deployed, and there's different steps and different tactics towards how any one organization goes about supporting that endeavor. It can range from the beginning of the process where organizations are submitting or publishing RFPs and RFIs to their respective vendors looking for information to begin with that process. That leads into a sourcing process, which ultimately leads into you know, an order being placed, requisitions being created, potentially from multiple vendors, multiple line items, multiple products and services, those flowing through a process to generate purchase orders, and then ultimately it's how you're handling receiving, and is that tying into inventory or not. So it's a very complex process, and then there's different models deployed, whether it's a central model or a decentral model. But effectively speaking, it can range from being, you know, mildly expensive to organizations to support it from a manual standpoint to a highly expensive process, depending upon the complexity of what you're trying to accomplish. And then on the screen before you see that manual cost for supporting that PO process can range anywhere from, you know, almost $36 per transaction up to over $500 per transaction, depending upon the complexity. In similar state, when you're talking about ultimately the payables process, and this is simply, hey, we get a bill in the door, we need to validate that bill, we need to code that bill, we need to process that bill and get it into our accounting system for payment. What's the range of cost that we're absorbing for that process, assuming it was manual? And when you look at the data that's available to us through PayStreams, and this is about a year old, The cost for that particular process is ranging anywhere from $5 to $15. So again, organizations, are faced undoubtedly with the need and the desire, not the desire, but the need to have to spend money in order to exist. How you do that is highly correlated to what the spend or the cost savings associated with that process are going to relate to. So we're going to take a quick second, since we do have a number of people on the line. We wanted to pause the audience real quickly just to get a sense as to what organizations today, or the organizations that you work for today, what are they doing? What are you doing specifically to manage the spend within your organization? So if you would take a minute, please, and just respond to the poll questions. It'd be helpful to kind of gather that information, and once we close out the poll, I'll share what those results are. Okay, so interestingly enough, of the group that we have on the phone, 40% are actually, it's ticking up as we go, so about 44% of the audience today is suggesting that their processes around spend are highly manual / Excel spreadsheets. We have 18% suggesting that it's probably somewhere in between, where they're using some forms, but they're using email or electronic form submission, so somewhere in between. And then we have about 24% suggesting that they have some web-based solution in place today, so it's either semi-automated or fully automated. And then there's about 5 or 6% suggesting no process at all, and we have about 5 or 6% suggesting that they're using an enterprise ERP system such as Oracle, SAP, or JD Edwards. So we appreciate the feedback. It's helpful as we move through the material. So at the end of the day, what are organizations striving to do? I mean, there's a notion out there that that ultimately that some automated process or automated tools are not aligned with the SMB. But at the same time, I think there's believers out there, at least 63% of the population believes that they need to leverage some sort of technology to better drive performance and better drive the process around spend. Personally, from our standpoint, what we find when we engage with organizations is that the first attempt is made at some anecdotal strategies or reactive strategies, which involve redefining or changing your policies that are associated with spend, maybe redefining the thresholds that you have approval chains associated with, maybe redefining the approval chain altogether, potentially removing some of the responsibility from some of the employees, so to try to get a handle or more control around the spending or more visibility around that. And what we find, or what we fear in terms of the feedback that we get from the audiences that we work with or the customers that we work with, is that although they try these things and they try to take a manual process and make it better, that oftentimes it hampers or stifles the business, because now you're creating constraints in terms of how the business typically operates. And when some of these decisions around spend are timely, people don't have the ability to wait for an executive to kind of free himself up to make the spending decision if you're trying to kind of centralize that decision to one or a small handful of people. So beyond, trying to adopt or reconfigure a manual-based process, unequivocally, the approach is to move forward and try to adopt some technologies to help with the augmentation of some of the manual processes that you've adopted and that you're maintaining today. So what Ardent is suggesting in terms of guidelines is, first and foremost, with the advent of cloud-based solutions, technology is certainly available to the SMBs and the nonprofits. It's available. Not only is it available, it's affordable, and it's fairly easily maintained. These projects, although you're talking about technology, they're not technology products. At the end of the day, they're going to be supported by the finance team, and I think that's a topic that maybe John can comment on when we reintroduce him here to the scenario or to the session in just a couple seconds here. But at the end of the day, it's a technology that's easily adoptable, it's easily scalable, and it's most importantly affordable to organizations independent of what their size is. When it comes to looking at technologies, you want to make sure it's broad enough to address multiple spend processes. Independent of who you are, what your business is, there's no telling where most of the dollars are flowing through. Do you have a predominantly a lot of your spend going through the expense reporting process? Maybe, maybe not. Is it your payables? Is it the bills that come in the door? That is where the lion's share of your spend is coming from, or is it tied to purchase orders relative to the vendors that you're dealing with for goods and services in support of the business? Independent of what channel is going through, ideally you'd like to have a solution in place that can adopt to and potentially address all three based upon the changing needs of the organization and the desire to want to have all the spend within the organization under one umbrella, so that it can be more strategically levered for making decisions about how you basically drive decisions moving forward in the future. Beyond that, what Arden is saying is that one of the key drivers for wanting to adopt these technologies should be the visibility that you gain into the spending process through the adoption of the technology. So the byproduct is ultimately automation, right? The various constituents involved in supporting the spend process, submitters, approvers, folks in accounting, executives, are all going to have now an automated way to drive the process, support the process, and glean insight in terms of the data that's associated with the transactions that are driven through the process. Beyond that, the byproduct is having the visibility, having the data at your fingertips, so you can drive a better understanding as to who's spending what, with who, for what. The ability to understand where you stand against the budget. If your organization managed budgets, you want to be proactive in managing against those budgets versus being reactive and waiting to the close of a quarter or the close of a month to understand what your spend is, so you can now react to that. And at the end of the day, you want to have some visibility into the pipeline of spend. Don't take inventory of spend after it's occurred. Understand what's happening as it's in the process. So you, as a manager, as a person that's accountable for managing a budget, can be more proactive in terms of how you make that decision around the spend and as to whether or not you spend it at that point in time or defer it. So from the standpoint of implementing and adopting an automated spend management solution, you have to understand that there's various constituents involved with supporting the specific process. The primary ones are the ones I just mentioned. There's folks who initiate a spend request, albeit whether it's a expense report, a purchase requisition, or an invoice that ultimately is received and now needs to be validated and approved. Okay, so there's folks that are initiating the process, creating the expense documents. There's those that are on the approval side of things. And the approvers want nothing more than to have the information delivered to them in a very easy fashion. And they want to be able to have all the information at their fingertips to make quick and meaningful decisions for the business. Beyond that, you have folks in accounting that are processing, and you have executives running the business that want to have their arms around spend. Okay, so at the end of the day, from a standpoint of where's the return on investment for the automation aspect or for the technology that's supporting the spend management process, if you look at some of the data that's presented in front of you through Ardent, 44% of the organizations polled suggest that they're able to better enforce their travel policies relative to expense reporting. They're able to lower processing costs, and we talked about that previously with the extensive savings that are associated with the automated process versus the manual one. They're able to increase visibility around spend, improve employee satisfaction. Potentially, they're getting reimbursements or payment back to the employees quicker if, in fact, the employee is floating that spend, that company spend, through cash or a personal card. And they're basically able to drive better corporate rebates if there's a corporate card program in place. So the benefits of automating, the benefits of adopting this type of technology are endless. It's a matter of corralling it, identifying what spend process or what multiple spend processes you're trying to encapsulate, and really being focused on making sure that you have a sound partner and sound policy around the spend to really take full advantage of the technology and of the benefits of the savings in the various areas we just discussed. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to reintroduce John Polio from the YMCA of South Florida. As I mentioned before, John, I believe, has been with the YMCA since 2009, and that is right around the time where the YMCA adopted the spend management capabilities through ExpenseWatch. I wanted to introduce John, take John through a Q&A process, which will hopefully, maybe answer many of the questions that many of you have out there in the form of, if you're contemplating something along these lines, what did John contemplate before he made the decision? After he made the decision, what kind of return did he see? What were the challenges, etc.? So John, welcome. I'm glad you're able to join us today. And could we just maybe start out, John, just for the audience that we have with us today, and for those that maybe not overly familiar with your organization, can you maybe just give us a brief background of the YMCA of South Florida, and then maybe a brief background of your experience with the Y?
So in 2009, I joined the Y, and in 2010, we were the YMCA of Broward County with revenues in the $30 million range. And so we were in a manual PO process, and we recognized that we needed to automate it. We chose ExpenseWatch for many reasons, but mostly because it's an automated process from the very beginning of a requisition all the way till the end of an invoice. It can be paperless if you want it to be. It doesn't have to be. You can print at any level, any step in that process, but we mostly do it as paperless. And now that since April 1st we merged with the Miami Y, so now we are a $47 million organization, and we have started to roll out ExpenseWatch in those locations. And I can tell you that the staff who is in charge of either creating a purchase order or approving it love the system and enjoy the fact that they can do everything online, and the approvals can happen in as quickly as 15 minutes rather than a week to 2 weeks with a manual process.
Yeah. Great, John. I appreciate the feedback. If you can remember back that far, and I know I think you were joining the Y right around the time that ExpenseWatch was being adopted, but certainly wasn't fully adopted at that point in time, whether it be at the YMC, at some of your previous experiences. Before you made the decision to move forward and automate the spending processes, can you talk to us about what the spend process was like, and maybe some of the challenges that the Y was facing, or again, maybe any other organization you worked with previous to the Y?
Sure. So at the Y, when I came, we were in a manual process. So basically, somebody had to create a manual PO on paper, had to have it approved by 2 or 3 approvers who were not necessarily in the same location, and so the piece of paper had to travel by courier to each approver before it made its way to accounting, where they could cut a check, or where back to the original person who created the purchase order, who could place the order with the vendor. All that process took at least a week, sometimes up to 2 or 3 weeks. I can't tell you how many POs were lost, vendors weren't paid, items weren't ordered. There was a breakdown in every stage of the process of purchasing. Our relationships are much better with this system with the vendors. They appreciate that a PO comes directly to their email or to a fax. You have both options with ExpenseWatch. The staff appreciates it. They get a reminder once it goes through the approval chain. The staff who generated the requisition gets a reminder that their requisition has been approved and that they can now generate a purchase order to their vendor. Even the packing list process is automated, where we generate the packing list to close a PO in ExpenseWatch, and so we're not chasing a piece of paper in a different location from where we cut checks to vendors. And now with South Florida Y, we have at least 12 locations that are ordering supplies, and many others that are off-site that aren't even YMCAs that we do business at, and we need to purchase supplies to run those locations.
Excellent, excellent. So when we engage with organizations, in most cases, those organizations have not automated any aspect of the spend process. They're considering it. They're supporting it through manual efforts right now. And one of the biggest concerns they have, for all the folks that are supporting the process is ultimately it's just change, right? We're going from something that although it's not efficient for the business, people are somewhat comfortable with it, they're familiar with it, and now we're going to bring a technology in place and ask everybody to learn this new technology, and we're going to impose change on these folks. Help me understand, what did the Y go through to help ease the concern around changing from a manual process to an automated one? Are there any key learnings you have to maybe share with the group, or any insight you can give people that would maybe put their minds at rest as to, hey, although it may be challenging and daunting, that it's certainly it's achievable, and it's not going to be that painful at the end of the day.
Sure. So the process is completely driven by finance, but we get the buy-in from all the people in operations because they're the staff that's ordering supplies. They're ordering office supplies, program supplies. The approval chain really helps because they can approve it. They don't have to be in the office. They could be off-site at a conference, and they can approve a requisition anywhere they want as long as they have an internet connection and they can log into ExpenseWatch. What we also did was a big help was we're able to load a vendor product list into ExpenseWatch, and also the budget, our budget from our accounting system into ExpenseWatch. So when they're building a requisition, they can see on that line item whether they have the money to spend, whether it's below budget or over budget. But the product list is the key because you can limit what they purchase with an approved list that's loaded in ExpenseWatch, and they cannot deviate from that list. There's permission levels that you have where you can limit who's able to add a vendor or even a product, so you don't have to have a situation like we had where we had multiple vendors in the same name, multiple products were being loaded, and so we could limit the data being clean. And so if they can only order one type of Post-it note, that's what's loaded on the product list, and they can only purchase that. They can't start picking and choosing their favorite items. Some items might be 5, 6 times more than the normal price. And so that's how we saved a lot of money in the first year, probably over $250,000 the first year that we implemented ExpenseWatch.
Very impressive. So just talking about, you gave us a lot of detail about where there were some advantage gains from going from what you were doing to ExpenseWatch. Just talk about the migration process period. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most challenging, 0 being the easiest, how difficult was it of a transformation to go from, what you were doing previous to ExpenseWatch? And then, if you can just comment on, how much you needed to rely on the team from ExpenseWatch versus you and your team taking responsibility on for yourself.
So the way we did it was we involved all the staff who is in charge, who has in various stages of the process. So we involved the operations people, finance people. From a scale of 1 to 10, it was probably a 3. ExpenseWatch was with us on every phone call. Every meeting we had, they called into, and it was the same person that called in. So the team was the same people calling in. So we knew we had consistency throughout the process. So the implementation was literally, it was pain-free. The most painful part was probably adding the product list, but even that was simplified when we could load the product list from an Excel spreadsheet that was in ExpenseWatch's format, and all we had to do was automatically, we uploaded it, and we could upload an entire product list in minutes. So we did that for some key vendors that we use all the time. T-shirt vendor, his products are loaded. Marketing vendor, their products are loaded. Office supplies, the approved, and it's all an approved list. So they cannot order off of that list unless they get permission from either their manager or or me in finance before we even add an item. So it keeps the data clean, and it keeps a close eye on spending. So the implementation process was, yeah, like a three, maybe a 3.
Great. So it's coming fast forward, 6 years removed from when you first adopted ExpenseWatch. Talk to us today about kind of the care and feeding that the system needs to have, and what level of support is required from ExpenseWatch, if any, just to kind of maintain and carry it forward. I know you're going through a challenging process right now where you just merged with the Miami Ys, and you have some restructuring to do and add some entities, etc. Just in general sense, I mean, how much bandwidth or resource do you need to dedicate to just managing ExpenseWatch?
It's not very much at all. The training, when we're in the middle of training new staff, so we're training Miami staff, and literally I've done 3 trainings, and the longest one was less than an hour, and that was only because that staff was more inquisitive and asked more questions. But it literally was less than an hour. They're turned on, they're using it, they love it, and we're processing even more POs now because we've added 3 locations in Miami, and one of the locations we added was the aftercare program in Miami. So they have 50 sites that they order for, and so we loaded a project code, and each project code represents a school site, and so they also order by school site, and they know exactly how much they're spending at each school, and it's an automated process. The approval is happening, and POs are getting processed in less than a day. And the beauty of it is when they generate a requisition, it's going through an approval process. When all the approvers have approved it, then they get a reminder email back to them that the requisition was approved, and they immediately generate a PO to their vendor. And most of the vendors we deal with, the items are delivered the next day. So office supplies, program supplies, as long as they get the order in by the end of the day, they get their items the next day. And it's all automated by ExpenseWatch.
Excellent, excellent. So great feedback, John. I appreciate it. So just another 2 or 3 just real quick questions. And you mentioned a lot of capabilities that we support, and you associated them with how you benefit. But is there one key feature that ExpenseWatch has to offer that you feel like the organization has just benefited from tremendously over all others? Or I don't know if it's an easy question to answer, but just given your experience and your use of the product, is there one thing that's kind of head and shoulders over everything else?
So it's very hard for me to even limit. I can't limit it to one, so I have 3. The 3 that I really like, the approval chain is automated. I like that I can load my budget into ExpenseWatch, so we can see the spending going on per each line item. And I love the paperless solution because as you know, if anybody's familiar with a YMCA, we generate tons and tons of paper a year, and we can absolutely cut. We don't have to print any paper to run ExpenseWatch. Some people still do because it's old habits die hard, but it really is a paperless solution. So those 3 really are the main ones that I like personally.
Great. Has the Y done any benchmarking or done anything internally to determine return on investment for the overall offering or for the capabilities that you're using?
So we have. So we did a benchmark in the first year, and that's how I came up with the $250,000 savings figure. Ongoing, we keep an eye on the processing time, how long, how each location, how fast do they get from putting in a requisition to placing an order. We stopped there because after they place the order, really the rest of the process is really relies on the finance staff. But for the people who are ordering product and services, we really benchmark when they generate a requisition and how fast they generate a PO. And there's no requisition that doesn't generate a PO in less than 3 days. So typically it's even shorter than that, but for the most part the average is They can submit a requisition and they can generate a PO in less than 3 days. Sometimes, because we run all our purchases through ExpenseWatch and we have emergency items that come up, we can do the whole process in 15 minutes. As long as somebody has access to a computer and the approval chain, and we get the people in line in the approval chain, and they can approve it. The other thing I wanted to mention about the approval chain is when somebody goes on vacation, we can replace that person with another approval delegate, and that person will approve the requisitions for the person out on vacation. So we don't have to ask the person on vacation to still log in to ExpenseWatch and approve POs. So that has been a big help for us because it doesn't bog down the process because somebody's either out sick or on vacation.
Excellent feedback, John. Just in closing, and again, I appreciate, I'm sure the audience appreciates all the detail you've been providing, given your experiences. But is there any, other closing thoughts or any data that you think the audience would be able to leverage just based upon what you've experienced?
So I would just say that if you're currently using a manual process today, that you owe it to yourself and to the staff to look at an automated process. The reason I would make sure that I look at ExpenseWatch is for what ExpenseWatch does, for the price point that they're at, and the value that you get, it really is a great deal. We're into our second 3-year contract right now, and we are so pleased with it that we had no hesitation when the first 3 years was up to sign on for another 3 years.
Very good. Much appreciated, John. Great information. I think it helps validate some of the findings and the research that Ardent had provided and that we presented earlier today. So really a great encapsulation of your experience, and really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and experience with myself and the rest of the group here today.